Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're looking at the classical period, and the early classical period dates from circa 480 to 450 BCE. And the classical period is like the pinnacle of Greek art. This is where the majority of the art that we think of as Greek is coming from. So we'll see some really important developments in this period. The first one being the term contrapposto, which I will explain in just one second. So when we look at this, this is the Kritos boy, circa 480 to 475 BCE. And if you remember back to the last video I made, we were looking at the Kouros figures. Now this is still a Kouros figure. This figure though is very different than this figure. This figure is much more realistic. Couple of reasons. The hair here is this very kind of weird stylized braid, where this is much more realistic. His eyes are gouged out like this because they would have been inset probably with glass to make them look even more realistic, and over time they've just been lost. But this, the way the body is done, the muscles are more realistic, and this figure has something called contrapposto, meaning that the hips are going one direction, and when you stand, you don't normally stand like this with one foot forward. Instead, when you stand so that you have more of your weight on one leg. And what this does is it shoots your hip out to the side. And so this is a more realistic way that people stand. Now, when we go back here so you can see it a little bit bigger, just over time we have the feet and the legs and the arms, they have broken off and been lost. This little thing on the side would have been attached to the hand just as a support. And the other thing you'll see that makes this more natural is that we have space between the legs and we have space between the arms, which is called negative space. We had that, we did have that in this figure as well. We did not have that in the Greek, in the Egyptian figure. We did not have that, but we do have that also in the early Greek figure. So here it is spelled out for you. So the beginning of contrapposto, it's a more naturalistic stance, and the hip is going to go out to one side, and in extreme contrapposto, the shoulders are going to be tilted in the opposite direction. And we have this very important container called a kylix that we're looking at, and it's an important container because it's telling us something that the Greeks invented. So we're actually looking at the bottom of the container. If it were to sit on the table, here's the base that it would sit on, and so if we flipped it over, we would have a big opening on the top that we cannot see. Here are the two handles. Now, these people, if you look at it at first and you don't understand what's going on, it looks like quite morbid. This guy is hitting this decapitated figure, and the head is over here, and it looks pretty gruesome. But that's not what's going on. Here we have a foundry, which is where you're melting metal. And they have, in this piece, shown that they've discovered or invented the technique of lost wax casting. And what lost wax casting did is it made it affordable and able to make large-scale metal sculptures that are hollow. So they could make them in sections and then put them together. So this head was made separately. It's going to end up on this body eventually. He's hitting it because he's finishing the surface of it. This guy's poking the embers here because it has to be a fairly high heat in order to melt metal. So how do you do a lost wax process? Well, you probably at some point in your life have seen a chocolate bunny like this that's hollow, or some other shape of chocolate that's hollow that has been made from a mold. So in this bunny, what you would do is you have this mold, and on the bottom of the mold there's a hole, or it comes apart and you're just pouring some chocolate into it. You're turning the mold as the chocolate is cooling, and then when you separate it, the whole inside has been coated, so you have this hollow piece of chocolate. And so technically it's very similar to that, to give you a visual. So they take, if you're going to make something solid out of wax, what you're going to do is, this is a very special kind of crystalline wax. Here they're making rings. This is how jewelry is made, or used to be made. And they make a mold like this, and they have, this would be made out of wax and molded out of wax. Then they take this and they make a mold around it. They put the mold, the second piece, on top, and then they're going to pour the very hot metal, gold or silver or something, into the area here. And what happens is this crystalline wax melts, and then this all melts out and it's replaced by metal, and that's how you make a metal piece of jewelry like this. Okay, so now we're going to think of it as a large-scale piece of bronze sculpture. What you're going to do is you're going to have a special material that you're making your mold out of. So first you would make like a clay replica of what you want to make, and from that you make a mold from the clay by putting the mold material around your object you've made out of clay, and then you open that up and you pour wax into it, like the chocolate, and you have to turn your mold so it coats the inside with wax. And then you take more of that plaster material and you put it inside the wax when the wax has cooled. So you have an object like this where you have the plaster material, and then you have wax, and then you have more plaster material. Okay. Then here it's showing that they're melting the wax out. You can melt it out like this, or you can have vents so that when you're pouring the metal in, it just vents out, the gas vents out, because the wax like this gets made into a gas with a high heat. It changes to a gas. Then you're going to pour in your bronze, your gold, whatever it is. And then lastly, you're breaking the mold around it. You're cutting off your extra little pieces here, and you're finishing your piece of metal. And then you have this piece of metal that is hollow on the inside. And so this is really the lost wax process. It's a labor-intensive, a lot of steps, but it allows the artist to be much freer with the way that he or she is creating the human form. We don't have to worry about arms breaking off and legs breaking off because the metal is very strong. This piece is it's almost 7 feet tall. So if it was a solid piece of metal, it would weigh not hundreds of pounds, but thousands of pounds. And it would have been extremely expensive to create. So making it hollow makes it so it's not as heavy, and also it makes it so that it is affordable. Most of these, though, unfortunately, were melted down over time and the metal was used again. But this, the warrior, he was found in the sea. So he was on a boat being transported, and the boat sunk for whatever reason, and it was lost for centuries, and then it was rediscovered, and that's how we have a full figure like this left. So he is dated to circa 460 to 450 BCE, made out of bronze, and then it has bone and glass eyes with silver teeth and copper lips and nipples. So he has things that have been added to him, right? But what I want to show you is he really has this beautiful contrapposto. You can see his weight is standing on this leg. His hips are definitely going at an angle. His arms are not attached to his body. They're free from the body. They're reaching out into, more space. He's able to actually have part of his foot bent up a little bit. And this is the back of it. And so it's just a much freer and more naturalistic stance to the figure that is achieved with this. And this brings us to the high classical period, and I'll make another video for that.